I'll just kind of tell you how I outlined this title. I've titled what I'm about to talk about today as Local Pioneers. Now, actually, not providing a title may be a better educational technique, because if I don't tell you a title, if you look at your notes later, you can come up with one of your own. But today, I want to make sure you know that I've titled this Local Pioneers. Used to be a reading comprehension thing. We would give the kids a paragraph and let them choose a title. So that is a good practice. But today, I wanted to tell you the title of this because I don't want there to be any doubt about whom I'm talking about or why I'm recognizing them. In a way, this is my own personal recognition of these saints. I notice I call them saints, and maybe you'll share these sentiments. My next little topic here is mouthwash. You're wondering how I'm going to tie this in. Well, last Tuesday, I followed my Jeremiah with some words to wash out our ears. Well, today, I want to finish the cleansing process by washing out my mouth, too. Not with another Jeremiah, but with words of praise. And as I wrote out these notes, I found it a lot easier to do this than a Jeremiah. Who are these local pioneers? You might have a better idea if I were to call them the local pioneers of the Church of God, late 20th century to early 21st century East Tennessee region. Now, that pretty well narrows it down. Of course, I'm referring to many, if not all of you in this room. I was expecting a bigger crowd today. My heart's not in this now. Let's see here. I brought on a little memorabilia here, I guess you'd call it. Trivia, whatever. Just these 2 pages. These are names that I wrote down. I've got the date on here, August 7th, 2nd, 1975, but these are names that I wrote down from the 1970s, 1980s at the Church of God, at the IBEW building. So you know what I'm talking about. Now, do you reckon that these are the pioneers that I'm referring to? Well, maybe, maybe not. If your name is not here, does that mean I don't regard you as one of these pioneers? Of course not. These are, like I told you, these are simply names of people I met here during the 1970s and 80s. Several of you were there, or you were with other congregations elsewhere, perhaps Knoxville or Asheville, North Carolina. So yes, you, all of you, to me, are the local pioneers that I'm going to recognize. I'll try to do this in such a general way that I won't necessarily have to mention names, because as a true pioneer in God's church, you're so humble and modest and unassuming and unpretentious that I'd probably embarrass you if I mention your name, so I won't do that. Was I one of the pioneers? That's the next question. I'm sorry to say no. But in the analogy I'm going to use today, I was a pioneer, but just a plain, ordinary pioneer. On the other hand, you pioneers are really special. You are saints, and you can prove that biblically if you look at Paul's letters, the first few lines. You qualify as saints. Now, the closest I've ever come to being called a saint is when someone said that I had the face of a saint. And then they added a Saint Bernard. Okay. Somebody did say that. Okay, my next topic is the wagon train. Please, don't get upset with me using this analogy of the wagon train. Let me just go on with it. I know it's a crude analogy, but just think of the old wagon trains heading out west. Now, I can't very well talk about camels or a caravan, so pioneers rode on horses and in wagons. And if Bill had been here today, I was going to pick on him here right now because they told me the other day they're going to bring me a picture of him riding on a horse. And this would have fit right in here, but he's not here. But it's some crazy picture of him, but one of our pioneers now. But you pioneers of the Church of God are in those wagons. and you're heading, well, you know where you're headed. I don't want to sound too religious right yet. And actually, during all the time, I was always nearby you, believe it or not. But I wasn't part of your training. Believe it or not, I actually even did a few things to help you out on your journey. And I always came to your defense if somebody said something bad about you or your wagon master. But other than that, I was basically worthless to you. I guess some things never changed. But you, now that's another story. You were and you still are the unsung heroes of that journey. And to me, you're one of those pioneers, whether you've been traveling like that for 5 years or as many as 50 years. But I think we'll all agree, if you've been traveling 30, 40, 50 years on this journey, that you really are special. And do you realize that some of those people are in this room? My next section, the works of the pioneers. To me, you, more than any computer, you are a tremendous source of information. Information about the history, the beliefs, the customs, the traditions, the doctrines, and even the biographies of God's church. More importantly, you are living examples of obedience, perseverance, and faithfulness, and what you were called to do. The endurance of the pioneers, that's the next thing. During the last 50 years, you and that entire wagon train have had to endure and overcome a lot of hardship, turbulence, and dissension. Something else I brought along. See if any of you remember this. C. Wayne Cole spoke over here at the Civic Auditorium. This is February 1974. He spoke, it seemed like it was a Friday night and a Saturday night, and then they followed up with about 10 weeks of Bible studies on a Monday night. One reason I remember this is my dad was over here in Holston Valley Hospital, and he actually died a week later. But I remember that, and I went to some of those Bible studies, and they really picked up a lot of membership at that time, I think. Some of you would know that. But I kept this. They sent out a postcard, with my name on it, and invited me to come up here. And Garner said it's got his hair is even black, if you could see that. And then they got a list here. I believe at the door that night, some of the members of the church, some of the young people were handing out things where you could request literature. So, you know, it was, I believe it was just about a month or two later that the church went through a crisis right after this. Not that this had anything to do with it, but they were having a big controversy about divorce and remarriage. Isn't that right? I believe it was 1974. And,
yeah.
Okay. And also, I think that was the year they changed the Pentecost from Monday to Sunday. I think it was around that time. So that was just the beginning of problems in the church. It really got bad 77, 78, and then, well, we know what's happened after that. Well, we may not know, but we'll see the results of it. But anyway, I wanted to show you that there was hardship and turbulence and dissension. You pioneers, you went through a lot. Some of the wagons abandoned the trail, gave up, and turned back. Your numbers dwindled. What did it used to be, 150,000 plus? Maybe 200,000 in the IBEW, about 300 people in there when I'd go in there. It was hard to find to see. Your supplies became scarce, but you knew from years of studying the Bible that this falling away and this scattering were going to happen. Maybe even some of you departed from the trail for a time. But the important thing is you came back. You returned. You'd been warned that your adversary is strong and clever. And sure, the supplies were lacking at times. But the one provision that has never been quenched in you is God's Holy Spirit. And with that power, God has enabled you to stand your ground. And you have emerged stronger than ever, safe and secure. My next section is just so I don't forget you. I'm thinking about starting a tradition of mine. You know, the church, did we still do that? There used to be a blessing of the children or something. It seemed like it was the first Sabbath after the feast. Do they still do that? We just don't have any children here, but okay, they do that at the feast, okay. And And of course, this past week, and I'm sorry I missed this, you observed the night to be most observed. Well, I'm declaring to myself that if I'm still up here speaking next year, which might not be so, that every year at this time I'm going to somehow come up with a sermonette or something to remember you again. And maybe the night to be much remembered can also be the night we also remember the pioneers of God's church. Now this part I put something personal. I told you earlier that although this story is really about you pioneers, there's something really personal in it for me. I've written myself a little note here to tell Linda to keep the Kleenexes handy. Just don't put perfume on this time. She had a Kleenex for me the other day. And I was just thinking this as I was walking out the door coming up here. I hadn't intended this to be any self-examination sermonette, but it's turned out that way. Because in remembering the pioneers, I examined myself where I was all those years. For many of those years during your journey, you never knew me at all. But I wonder if someday we might both learn that it was your prayers which brought a miracle in my life. That day back in 1983 out on the highway when a crash involving me looked imminent. Yet it never happened. Not even a fender bender. Not even the sound of a car's horn. Will we learn that it was by your prayers that I've been protected from serious illness and from getting involved in things that I shouldn't get involved in? And was it not your prayers that brought about comfort and strength when I, like so many of you, suffered the loss of family members? And for sure it was your tithes and your offerings and your prayers which drew me closer to God's truth and kept me near your wagon train. And I want you to know, too, that you were never out of my sight. And while they probably don't realize it now, many, many more people probably owe similar debts of gratitude to you and, of course, to God. Someday we may really know the abundance of the fruit God's Spirit has been produced in you and by you. And like the faithful servants of the parables, your increase is already very pleasing to our Master. Next section. Acts of the Pioneers of God's Church. That's ACTS. Perhaps in the world tomorrow, an additional book of Acts will be written. But rather than being called the Acts of the Apostles, it might be called Acts of the Pioneers of God's Church. And each chapter might be about a different pioneer. And unlike the book of Hebrews, where there's only one chapter we call the faith chapter, in this new book of Acts, every chapter will be a faith chapter. And your names should be there. And if by chance I'm assigned to teaching duties then, I'll be sure to tell my new students then. Students who will be learning the truth for the first time. I won't neglect to tell them the story about that fellowship group in Kingsport, Tennessee, who on October 20th, 2012, had every reason to greet me as I came out of the baptismal waters with, "What took you so long?" But instead, because you are the pioneers and you always say and do the right things, you met me and Christina and Ray with a big hug and a welcome to God's family. Conclusion. For years, alongside you, out on that trail, I admired you pioneers as you kept moving forward, clearing the trail as you went and making it easier for me and eventually thousands and probably even millions to follow. Maybe even billions. If you could have read my mind then, you might have heard me urging you too, not to worry about me. You just keep on moving and keep on praying, for by God's grace I'll join you somewhere down the trail. And I did, because I had no other choice. Because as John 6:68 affirms, where else could I go? Only you have the words of eternal life.